Naomi had always been a determined woman, someone who believed in hard work and the promise of a better tomorrow. After the death of her husband 2 years ago, she poured all her energy into raising her young son, Malik, and rebuilding a life that felt shattered. They had been through so much: grief, financial struggles, and a constant battle to stay afloat. But this time, things were going to be different. They had moved to a new neighborhood, a quiet suburban area that promised peace. Naomi found a charming old house, one that had stood for decades, nestled at the edge of 34th Street. It was large, more space than they truly needed, but it was a fresh start. A place to heal, to rebuild, and maybe even find some joy again. She had worked hard to afford it, and for Malik, it was going to be a new beginning. No more cramped apartments, no more constant reminders of the life they left behind. The day they arrived, Malik was unusually quiet. He was a lively boy, full of questions and curiosity, but something about this place unsettled him. Naomi, ever the protector, assured him it was just nerves, that everything would be fine. It was just a house, after all. They had lived in worse places, dealt with worse things. This was just the next chapter, and they were both strong enough to handle it. As they unpacked, Naomi couldn't help but feel a weight settle over her. There was something about the house, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The air felt heavy, like a secret that hadn't been told in years. But she brushed it aside, focusing on the excitement of their new life. Malik ran through the rooms, his little feet thudding against the wooden floors, his laughter echoing in the halls. He was still her happy, bright child, everything would be fine. By nightfall, the house seemed even larger, the rooms stretching out in all directions. Naomi made a quick dinner for them both, keeping things simple, and they ate in the kitchen. She spoke to Malik about school and how he was going to make new friends. Malik, however, wasn't his usual self. He was quiet, his fork scraping against his plate but not quite eating. "You okay, baby?" Naomi asked, noticing his distant stare. Malik nodded slowly, but the unease in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. She didn't press him further, not wanting to push him, but she couldn't help but wonder if it was just the newness of everything. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar creaks of the house, or maybe it was just the feeling of being in an old, unfamiliar place. That night, after they both settled into their separate rooms, Naomi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and groaned, as all old houses did, but there was something in the sound that felt different. A deeper groan, almost as if the house was sighing under the weight of some long-held secret. She told herself it was nothing, just the house settling, but sleep didn't come easily that night. The silence felt too loud, the darkness too deep. As she finally drifted into sleep, a soft whisper seemed to brush against her ear. It was barely a sound, just a flicker in the night air. Naomi blinked, opening her eyes to the stillness of the room, heart racing for a moment. The whisper had vanished as quickly as it had come. She shook her head, chiding herself for being so jumpy. It was just the wind. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to the house shift and creak around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The next morning, things seemed brighter. The sun shone through the windows, and Naomi was determined to push aside the unease she had felt the night before. It was a fresh day, a new beginning. She and Malik spent the day unpacking and exploring the house. The rooms were spacious, filled with natural light, and the backyard offered a large garden with a few overgrown bushes that Malik was eager to explore. Despite the promise of a new start, something remained, a subtle tension in the air that Naomi couldn't ignore. She hadn't yet spoken to Malik about what had happened the night before, but when she saw him staring at the corner of the living room, his eyes fixed on something, she knew he felt it too. "Malik, come on, let's get you some lunch," she called, trying to break his trance. He blinked, slowly turning away from the corner, but his gaze lingered for a moment longer than it should have. Naomi felt her chest tighten but again pushed the feeling aside. They were fine. They had to be. That night, after putting Malik to bed, Naomi made a quick phone call to check in with her mother. They spoke briefly about the house, the move, and how Malik was adjusting. Her mother had been supportive, encouraging, but she could tell Naomi's voice held an undercurrent of unease. "Everything okay, honey?" her mother asked, her tone soft with concern. Naomi hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's just an old house, Mom. You know how it is. I'm sure it's nothing." Her mother didn't press further, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying, even if it was only to herself. Later that evening, after a long, tiring day of organizing, Naomi settled down on the couch, trying to unwind. The television buzzed quietly in the background as she flipped through channels, her thoughts wandering back to the eerie feeling that had taken root. There was a sound from the kitchen, a faint thud, followed by the scraping of something against the floor. Naomi's head snapped up, her heart racing. "Malik," she called, standing up and walking toward the kitchen. The room was empty, but the floor was scattered with small kitchen utensils, spoons, forks, and a butter knife. They hadn't been there before. Naomi froze. She could feel it again, the weight, the presence. Something was wrong in this house, and it wasn't going to go away. The next few days were a blur of small, unsettling events. Naomi tried to stay focused on unpacking and settling into their new routine. She was determined not to let the strange occurrences shake her resolve. After all, the house was just old. Old houses creak, old houses shift, and sometimes, the wind played tricks on your ears. But even Naomi couldn't ignore the growing unease. One morning, Malik came to her, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, I saw it again," he whispered, his voice trembling. Naomi knelt down to his level, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Saw what, baby?" she asked, though a part of her already knew. "The man in the corner. The one who watches me," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She tried to calm him, telling him it was just his imagination. But deep down, she couldn't help but feel a chill settle in her chest. She knew that whatever he was seeing, whatever he was feeling, wasn't just in his head. That evening, after putting Malik to bed, Naomi decided to stay up late, hoping to catch some sleep after the stressful days. The house was still, eerily still, except for the soft creaks and groans of the floorboards. She settled onto the couch, her mind racing, trying to make sense of everything that had been happening. She tried to push her thoughts away, but then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping from upstairs. It started as a low, almost inaudible sound, but it grew louder with each passing second. Tap. 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 Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The sound wasn't normal. It wasn't the house settling. It was something, or someone, deliberately making noise. Naomi's heart raced as she stood up and slowly made her way upstairs. The sound continued, getting louder and louder with every step she took. She reached the top of the stairs and stopped, staring down the dark hallway that led to Malik's room. The tapping stopped. Everything was silent. Too silent. With her pulse hammering in her ears, Naomi walked cautiously toward Malik's room. She opened the door, only to find her son fast asleep, his face calm and innocent. But there was something wrong. A chill in the air, an oppressive weight that seemed to press down on her. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, breathing, watching. Naomi closed the door quietly and moved to the living room, her mind racing. She knew she wasn't imagining things. Something in this house was alive, and it didn't want them here. Later that night, as she sat in the living room, her eyes darted toward the kitchen. There, on the edge of the counter, something caught her eye. A small figurine, a porcelain angel, that hadn't been there before. Naomi blinked, certain she hadn't left it there. Her heart thudded against her chest as she slowly stood up. She reached for the figurine, and as soon as her fingers touched it, the lights flickered. A harsh buzzing sound filled the air, and Naomi's stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows stretching unnaturally. In a panic, she dropped the figurine, and it shattered on the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the whispering. A low, eerie whisper that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You can't escape." The voice was cold and cruel, sending a shiver down her spine. Naomi stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. She was frozen in place, her heart pounding, unable to move as the whispering continued, growing louder. "You can't leave. You can never leave." Her mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. The house wasn't just old, it was haunted. There was something dark and powerful within these walls, something that had been waiting for years, and it was angry. Angry that she and Malik had come here. Naomi forced herself to move, rushing out of the room and into Malik's, closing the door behind her. She knelt beside his bed, shaking him gently. "Malik, wake up," she whispered urgently. Malik stirred but didn't wake. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by strange scratching sounds from the walls. Naomi could feel her breath catch in her throat as she looked around the room. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe, as if they were alive, reaching out for them. Finally, Malik woke with a start, his wide eyes filled with fear. "Mom, I don't like it here," he whispered, his voice shaking. Naomi's heart ached for him. "I know, baby. I know. We're going to be okay. We just need to be strong." But even as she said the words, she knew they were no longer safe. The house was a trap, and they were its prey. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and unsettling events. Naomi's resolve to protect Malik began to waver, the weight of the house's dark presence pressing down on her at every turn. The whispers never stopped, and neither did the strange noises, scratching at the walls, footsteps in the halls when no one was there, doors that slammed shut for no reason. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. In the early morning hours, after Malik had fallen asleep in her bed once more, Naomi decided she couldn't ignore the signs any longer. She had to figure out what was happening in this house. She couldn't let it claim her son. The next morning, Naomi walked down to the local library, her determination growing with each step. She wasn't sure what she was searching for, but she needed answers. She needed to understand why this house felt so wrong. The library was quiet, as it usually was. Naomi scanned the aisles, searching for anything related to the house on 34th Street. She asked the librarian if there were any records or historical information about the neighborhood, but the librarian simply shrugged, stating that the area wasn't really known for anything significant. That was until Naomi asked about the property where they lived. The librarian's expression shifted. "You're living at 34th Street, the librarian asked in a low, almost disbelieving voice. "I didn't think anyone would ever buy that place." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "Why? What do you mean?" The librarian hesitated before answering. "That house, it's been abandoned for years. No one ever lasted long enough to live there. It has a dark reputation. People say the last owner, he wasn't quite right in the head." Naomi frowned, leaning in closer. "What happened to him?" The librarian shifted uncomfortably. "Well, some say he went mad. Some say he disappeared. But whatever the case, there was talk of strange things happening in that house, long before you moved in. Some people even claim it's haunted. There's talk of a curse." Naomi felt her stomach twist with dread. She had heard rumors of haunted houses before, but this felt different. She pressed the librarian for more information, but all the woman could offer was a vague warning. "Be careful. That house isn't just old. It holds a dark history." "I'd be careful if I were you," she said softly. Naomi left the library, her mind racing. She had to know more. Back at home, she searched the house for any clues. She went through the old cabinets and drawers, hoping for something, anything, that would give her more insight into the house's past. It was only when she stumbled across an old, dusty journal hidden beneath the floorboards in the attic that she felt a chill run down her spine. The journal, written in a shaky hand, belonged to the house's previous owner, a man named Albert Ralston. As Naomi flipped through the pages, she was horrified to read about the man's descent into madness. Albert had been obsessed with something he referred to as the dark force that inhabited the house. He wrote about strange whispers that kept him up at night, about shadows that moved when no one was around, and about a presence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The final pages of the journal were frantic, almost illegible, as if Albert had been writing in a panic. The last entry read, "It won't let me leave. I can hear it breathing. The darkness is too strong now. I can't escape." Naomi's hands shook as she closed the journal, the weight of the discovery sinking in. She had found the truth, but it was more terrifying than anything she had imagined. The house wasn't just haunted. It was cursed, and whatever force was in that house had claimed Albert Ralston. It hadn't let him go, and now, it had set its sights on her and Malik. That evening, Naomi sat with Malik, her mind racing. She couldn't let him be hurt. She wouldn't let him be taken by whatever haunted this place. But what could she do? She wasn't equipped to fight a curse, a dark force that had existed for generations. Malik, sensing her anxiety, clung to her side. "Mom, can we go somewhere else?" he asked, his voice small and fearful. Naomi took a deep breath and pulled him close. "I promise you, we'll be okay. I won't let anything happen to you. We're going to find a way out of this. Together." But Naomi knew that they couldn't just leave. There was something in the house, something powerful, and it wouldn't let them go so easily. The house had already claimed so many before them. What would make them any different? The answer came to her that night. She couldn't escape the house. She had to confront it. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that weighed heavily on your chest. Naomi spent countless sleepless nights researching anything she could find about curses, spirits, and dark forces. She pored over every book, every article, and every piece of folklore she could uncover. But no matter how much she read, nothing seemed to offer her a solution. There was no easy answer for someone in her position. No quick fix for a curse that had likely been festering in the house for decades, if not longer. She knew that the dark presence in the house wasn't going to let them go without a fight. Whatever it was, it wanted them to stay. To succumb to its power. And Naomi wasn't going to allow that. She had made a promise to Malik, she would protect him, no matter what it took. But as the days went on, the hauntings grew worse. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just limited to the walls anymore. Naomi could hear them in the air, in the floorboards, in the very fabric of the house. Malik grew more withdrawn, his face pale and drawn. He no longer played with his toys or laughed like he used to. Instead, he spent his days in silence, his eyes darting around the room, as if expecting something to jump out at him at any moment. One afternoon, Naomi tried something different. She had read about spiritual protection rituals, about cleansing a home of evil forces, and though she didn't fully understand how they worked, she was desperate enough to try anything. She gathered candles, herbs, and salt, ingredients that she had read were used in rituals to banish dark spirits. She filled the house with the flickering light of the candles, the smell of burning sage and rosemary filling the air. With each step, Naomi muttered prayers she had learned from various sources, her voice shaking but determined. She felt a strange energy building, as if the very walls of the house were pressing in on her, resisting her efforts. But she refused to back down. She wasn't leaving until Malik was safe, until this dark force was gone for good. As the ritual continued, the temperature in the house dropped dramatically. Her breath misted in the air, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow darker, more defined. The house seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. Then, a sudden crash echoed from the kitchen. Naomi whipped around, her heart pounding. She rushed into the kitchen, Malik at her heels, only to find the room eerily still. The salt that had been spread around the floor to protect them had been disturbed. It was as if something had swept through the room, knocking the protective barrier aside. Naomi's stomach churned as she realized that whatever force was haunting them, it had found a way to fight back. "Mom, I'm scared," Malik whispered, clutching her hand tightly. His voice was small, almost lost in the vastness of the oppressive silence. "I know, baby. I know," Naomi whispered back, her voice barely a breath. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. She needed to act fast. She couldn't let this go on any longer.